They say memory is a strange architect. It constructs palaces of pain with the same care it builds gardens of joy. And on that particular evening, in a room soaked with polite laughter and the metallic clink of cutlery, memory chose to lay bricks of silence and shame in front of me once again. The invitation never arrived. But then it never did. Not for birthdays. Not for anniversaries. Certainly not for the gala my father was hosting to commemorate 40 years at the helm of his construction empire. 40 years of blueprints and buildings, of handshakes and hard hats, of which I was expected to play no part. The irony never escaped me. I studied architecture. I graduated top of my class. But he never once walked through the studio where I stayed up nights designing the kind of buildings he'd later take credit for in meetings I wasn't invited to. "You're not on the list," he said when I arrived. Just like that. As though I were a party crasher and not his daughter. His only daughter. The security guard, a man with a clipboard and soft eyes that didn't meet mine, hesitated. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, quieter, perhaps unsure himself. I could have turned away right then, melted into the sidewalk and vanished into the night air like steam. I'd done it before, stepped back, disappeared, made it easier for them to forget me. But not this time. Not when the box in my hands carried something more than a gift. It was a model of the first building I ever designed, a replica I made by hand, down to the miniature etched nameplate that bore both of our last names. One day, I thought, he might see it and understand that what I built wasn't just glass and steel. It was a bridge back to him, if he ever cared to cross it. I left the box on the reception table, beside a spray of lilies and a pile of unopened cards. I didn't say another word. I simply turned, chin high, steps even. But just before the doors could close behind me, someone called out, "That's my boss." "Sit down, ma'am." His voice came from the back, deep and sure. Every chair seemed to shift. Every breath caught mid-inhale. My father's posture stiffened, just slightly, enough for me to see it. Enough to know I hadn't disappeared completely. I turned slowly. There he stood, David Ramirez. Senior project manager. One of my hires. One of the few who'd followed me when I started my own firm after years of being overlooked in his. He was dressed sharply, tailored navy suit, the cufflinks I gave him when he signed our first 7-figure deal. His hand rested calmly on the back of a chair as he nodded to the guard. "She owns Legacy Design Group," he said. "Half the skyline you're celebrating tonight?" "That's her work." Silence blanketed the room. I could feel their eyes, his colleagues, his business partners, even my brothers who had always been invited. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence had become my power. The girl who once cried herself to sleep for not being enough had learned, over time, to build silence into strength. And strength into empire. My father didn't look at me. He simply turned to the guard and muttered something about protocol. But it was too late. The damage, or the revelation, was done. David walked over and handed me a glass of sparkling water. "You don't need their invitation," he said under his breath. "You wrote your own." And as I took the glass, something in me shifted. The invisible daughter. The afterthought. The architect of her own exile had become the architect of something greater. Not all buildings are made of stone and mortar. Some are made of resilience, resolve, and a quiet refusal to be erased. I didn't stay long. The air in that ballroom, thick with perfume and pretense, never truly belonged to me. Even as I stood there, flanked by David's unwavering presence and the hush of eyes finally seeing, I knew my place wasn't among those linen-draped tables and hollow toasts. It was beyond them, above them, somewhere in the steel bones of the city I helped shape. But still, I lingered long enough to see the cracks. In my father's carefully curated image, in the armor of indifference he wore so convincingly, and in the faces of my brothers, James with his furrowed brow, as if trying to calculate what this all meant for the business, and Caleb, who always followed father's shadow like a second skin, now looking at me as though he'd seen a ghost from a story they never let him hear. "You should have told me you were coming," David said quietly once we stepped into the crisp night air. They didn't tell me I was welcome, I replied, a half-smile curling on my lips. We walked a few blocks in silence. The city hummed around us, horns in the distance, the rustle of leaves, the muted clatter of a passing train. And beneath it all, the sound of something finally settling inside me. "You okay?" he asked. "I think I am," I said, for the first time in a long time. When I started Legacy Design Group 3 years earlier, it was out of necessity more than courage. After being passed over for a partnership, again, I stopped waiting for the applause that never came. I borrowed, I bargained, I barely slept. And slowly, the firm took shape. We landed small projects at first, cafes, pop-ups, a community center in the South Loop. But the spaces were beautiful, functional, full of heart. People noticed. And eventually, so did the skyline. But not my father. He never once acknowledged the articles, the awards, the architectural features that bore my name. At family dinners, he talked about real work, about the construction business. When I brought renderings to show my nieces and nephews, he changed the subject to sports. When I sent him a personalized book of my first 10 completed projects for Christmas, it came back unopened. And yet, when the media began to buzz about the woman reshaping Chicago's public spaces, he suddenly launched an initiative to revitalize the city's west side, using my ideas repackaged through someone else. He couldn't silence me. So he erased me. Until tonight. As David walked me to my car, he hesitated. "You know," he said, "I think they always knew. They just hoped you wouldn't notice your own worth." I paused with my hand on the car door. "They made sure I didn't." "But you did," he said. "That's what scares them." It wasn't revenge I was after. I wasn't there to confront or expose. I was there because I'd spent a lifetime shrinking myself to fit a blueprint they laid out long before I knew how to draw my own. And tonight, I finally stepped outside of it. I drove home through quiet streets, each traffic light catching the glint of the small gold keychain that hung from my rearview mirror, an architect's compass, a gift from my first client. Underneath it, a tag etched with one word, built. Built from what they left behind. Built from silence. Built for me. And the next morning, when I arrived at the office, the front desk assistant handed me a bouquet of lilies and a note with no return name. Just 5 words. "You are always on the list." I set the lilies down on my desk and stared at the note again. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, deliberate, like someone who still believed in the art of writing by hand. 5 words. No name. And yet they felt heavier than any compliment or apology my family had ever offered. You were always on the list. Not their list, of course. Never theirs. But perhaps on the list that mattered, the one I wrote in secret, in silence, each time I stood in a shadow and built something anyway. Each time I held my breath when they passed me over, and then exhaled it into something beautiful they'd never claim but couldn't deny. The office hummed with early morning energy. My team was already trickling in Jules from materials, Micah from drafting, Naomi from urban planning. They greeted me like always, with warmth and respect. Not because of what I did last night, but because of what I did every day. The quiet hours, the overlooked details, the late nights sketching possibilities into places where people could feel seen, held whole. David passed by my glass door and gave a slight nod, the kind that says more than words. Last night hadn't just been a moment. It was a reckoning. And something told me it wasn't over. I opened my inbox to a flood of messages. A few from clients. Some from local journalists. Rumors had already begun to swirl about my impromptu appearance at the gala. But one message made me pause. Subject line, request for meeting. Sent by Caleb Parker. My brother. I hesitated, then clicked. Olivia. I know last night probably wasn't easy for you. I can't pretend to understand everything, but I'd like to. Can we meet? Coffee, lunch, whatever works for you. Just, not at Dad's house. I'd like to talk, just us. Caleb. I stared at the screen, my hand motionless on the mouse. Caleb, the brother who once snuck into my room with flashlights and whispered stories when storms made me cry. The one who drifted away slowly, swallowed by our father's expectations and the quiet pressure to be the son who stayed. Could he really want to know me again? Or was this damage control? Still, I replied. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Verve Cafe on Lakeview. Just us. No pleasantries. No heart pouring. Just a place. A time. A test. When I arrived at Verve the next morning, the scent of fresh espresso mingled with warm wood and the subtle chatter of early patrons. I chose a corner table beneath a framed map of the old city, one of my favorite design pieces from our early projects. Caleb was already there. Hair more salt than pepper now. Hands wrapped around a coffee cup like he needed it to anchor him. Olivia, he said, standing awkwardly. Caleb. He gestured to the empty seat, and I sat. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, he exhaled. You've built something incredible. You've never said that before. I wasn't allowed to, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Dad made sure we didn't talk about you. He said you'd chosen your own path, that you didn't want to be part of the family business. I laughed once, short and bitter. He didn't let me. There's a difference. Caleb looked down. I know that now. We talked. About the past. The silences. The things we both swallowed to survive. He admitted he envied me. Not for the success, but for the courage to walk away. I couldn't do it, he said. I still can't. That's okay, I said, meaning it. But you can stop pretending I don't exist. He nodded. And when we stood to leave, he surprised me with a hug. I missed you, Liv, he said into my shoulder. I missed him too. As I walked back into the sunlit street, something shifted again. The reunion I never got had finally begun. Not with applause, but with a single note. A silent room. A whispered, "That's my boss." And now, the first conversation that wasn't built on obligation or image, but on something more lasting. Truth. Back in my apartment that evening, I opened the top drawer of the old desk I'd rescued from a salvage yard in Hyde Park. The wood, once weathered and brittle, had been sanded down, stained with care, and sealed into something solid. Something that endured. Inside that drawer lay a small, linen-bound notebook, frayed at the corners, its pages filled with letters I had written but never mailed. Each one addressed to my father, my mother, my brothers, even my childhood self. I wrote my first entry the day I left his firm. I had sat at this very desk, heart in shards, hands trembling with rage and grief. Not one goodbye. Not a single word of recognition after 5 years of pouring myself into projects they took credit for. I didn't write out of hope. I wrote to keep from unraveling. I picked up the book now, leafing through pages lined with inked pain and unspoken truths. Dear Dad, I know I wasn't the son you wanted. I wasn't strong enough to carry your expectations, not in the way you demanded. But I carried something else. I carried the weight of being unseen and still chose to build beauty anyway. That should count for something. I closed the book. Maybe I'd never send these letters. Maybe I'd outgrown the need to. But they had kept me tethered when I might have floated into bitterness. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Jules. You might want to see this. Check the Tribune. I clicked the link. The headline read, "Unknown architect behind Chicago's revitalization finally steps into spotlight." And below it, a photo, me, at the gala, standing at the entrance just before David spoke. The caption read simply, Olivia Parker, founder of Legacy Design Group, the mind behind some of the city's most beloved urban projects. I hadn't known a photographer had captured that moment. I hadn't prepared for visibility. But now, I was ready. That article triggered a cascade. By the end of the week, I was fielding interview requests from major design magazines. A TEDx talk invitation landed in my inbox. Even a panel spot at the National Women in Architecture Conference. And then came the message I least expected. From my mother. Olivia. I read the article. You look strong, beautiful. We're proud of you. Your father hasn't said it, but I can tell he's shaken. In his way, he sees you now. I hope that's not too little, too late. Love, Mom. I sat with the message for a long time. There was no apology, not exactly. But there was something quieter, more fragile, acknowledgement. The girl who once rearranged dinner plates to make the table setting more welcoming, she was finally being seen. Not just by strangers, but by the very people who once turned the other way. The next day, as I entered the legacy office, the front desk held another surprise. A box. Inside, the model I'd left at the gala. Alongside it, a note. It's yours. It always was. Anonymous. But I knew that handwriting. My father's blocky script, the same one that used to scrawl blueprints approved in red ink. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I placed the model on the shelf behind my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a testament to everything they didn't give me and everything I built anyway. The foundation was mine now. And I wasn't going anywhere. Some lessons are never spoken aloud. They're carved in silence, passed down not in wisdom, but in what's withheld. And in the Parker household, one such unspoken rule stood above all else. Vulnerability was weakness. Praise came with caveats. Love with limits. And silence. Silence was the reward for those who didn't toe the family line. Growing up, I learned to translate glances like they were a second language. The way my father's eyes skimmed over me when he asked about everyone's achievements at the dinner table. The way my mother would offer a too-tight smile when I mentioned school projects, quickly changing the subject to Marcus's surgical accolades or Vanessa's latest legal victory. Even as a child, I sensed the borders of belonging. My art projects were hung on the fridge for a day, then quietly replaced by honor roll certificates from my siblings. I stopped asking to host birthday parties at home after my 10th, when my father used my decorations to scold me. This isn't a circus, he'd muttered, tearing down the streamers I spent the week designing. They didn't mean to dim my light. Not intentionally. They simply had no blueprint for anything outside the one they'd drawn for us. Doctors, lawyers, bankers, real careers with predictable prestige. Anything that diverged was a deviation. An inconvenience. An embarrassment. So I became a chameleon. I learned to smile at their jokes. To applaud when others were praised. To bury my own wins beneath deference and deflection. I sharpened the edges of my dreams into something quieter, more acceptable. Until one day, I stopped recognizing them altogether. College was my first breath of air. But even there, I played it safe. Hospitality management, creative enough to hold my heart, structured enough to appease theirs. But when I graduated and announced I'd be starting my own boutique firm, their disapproval was palpable. Glorified party planning, Aunt Marilyn had said. Parkers don't serve. They lead. I remember the sting, but more than that, I remember the moment I smiled because I finally realized I didn't need to lead their way. I created spaces. Not just physical ones, but emotional sanctuaries. Hotels that whispered luxury without arrogance. Retreats that wrapped around weary souls and told them, you belong here. My first property took everything I had, my savings, my sleep, my sanity, but it bloomed. Guests returned. Word spread. And slowly, Legacy Design Group was born. They didn't come to the ribbon cutting. They didn't send flowers. But I kept going, because some things like resilience, like grace, aren't taught. They're forged. And now, as I sat in the conference room of my 5th hotel property, watching a new batch of young designers present their concepts, I felt something warm in my chest. Not pride exactly. Not triumph. But a soft, steady knowing. I had broken the cycle. I wasn't just building structures. I was building legacies. The kind they never taught me how to create. 2 weeks after the gala, a cream-colored envelope arrived at the office, thick parchment, embossed seal, addressed in a script that looked like it had been lifted from a wedding planner's dreams. It was from Vanessa. I hadn't heard from her directly in over a year, not since she declined my invitation to Legacy's inaugural Women in Design event with a curt, "I'm too busy these days, Liv. But best of luck." I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside, a formal invitation to her law firm's 10-year anniversary gala. Gold foil, live music, black tie, and this: "We'd be honored if you'd attend as our guest of distinction." My breath caught in my chest. Guest of distinction? My sister, who had once called my business a hobby that pays the bills, was now extending an olive branch. Or was it a test? I almost tossed the card, but something held me back. I thought of the times we used to sit on the stairs late at night, whispering secrets in the dark when we were still more sisters than strangers. When she told me she was afraid of Dad's expectations, and I promised her that being brave didn't always look like rebellion, it could also look like being herself. Maybe this was her first attempt. The night of the gala, I wore a midnight blue gown, sleek and simple, paired with the diamond studs I bought for myself after my first $1 million deal. No flash, just truth. The venue was stunning: glass chandeliers, string quartet, white lilies on every table. I arrived early, out of habit, and scanned the room for familiar faces. Most were colleagues of hers I'd only seen in newspaper clippings. Then I saw her, Vanessa. Regal in a silver dress, her dark curls pinned up, her expression unreadable. She spotted me and crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps. "Olivia," she said, voice softer than I remembered. "You came." I wasn't sure I should. She hesitated. "I wasn't sure you would." A pause passed between us, thick with unspoken apologies and memories too complicated to hold all at once. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said finally. "For the things I said. For not being there." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." We stood like that for a moment, two women who had loved each other fiercely once and lost each other somewhere between success and survival. Maybe this was the beginning of finding our way back. During the evening, I was called to the stage. "Olivia Parker," the announcer said, "whose vision has redefined not only our city's hospitality, but how we experience space, belonging, and beauty." There was polite applause. But from Vanessa's table, it was something more. I saw it in her eyes, recognition. When the night ended, she hugged me. Tightly. "Let's not let it be years again," she whispered. I left the venue with heels in one hand and my phone in the other. A message from David blinked on the screen. "How did it go?" I smiled before replying. We remembered we were sisters before we were anything else. Sometimes, healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with a single brave return. In the weeks that followed the gala, Vanessa and I started meeting for quiet breakfasts. Just the two of us. No suits, no scripts, no perfect hair. Just coffee, oat milk lattes, and the slow rebuilding of something once sacred. We didn't talk about the past right away. We talked about small things: weather, books, what her kids were learning in school. But beneath the small talk, a current of recognition pulsed, steady and undeniable. One morning, as snow began to fall soft and slow outside the cafe window, she stirred her coffee absently and said, "You know, I used to envy you." I blinked. "What?" "You were always free. Or at least that's how it looked. You didn't care what they thought. You did things your way." I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. I cared. I cared so much I thought it would break me. She nodded slowly. That's the part one didn't see. We sat in that tender silence, one only sisters can truly share. The kind that's stitched together by years of shared bedrooms, hidden diary pages, and late-night whispers no one else heard. "I think I just got tired of trying to earn their love," I admitted. "So I decided to love myself instead." Vanessa looked down, tracing the rim of her mug with a fingertip. "And now they look at you like they're seeing you for the first time." Maybe they are. It wasn't bitterness in my voice. Just truth. The kind that's heavy enough to ground you, but not so heavy it drags you under. That afternoon, she sent me a picture, an old one she'd found in her attic. We were maybe 7 and 12. I had a towel wrapped around my shoulders like a cape, and Vanessa was holding a cardboard wand we made out of paper towel tubes. We were standing in the backyard, laughing so hard we were blurry in the photo. Super Liv and the Magical V, she captioned it. I hadn't remembered that nickname in years, but seeing it made my chest ache in the most unexpected way. We weren't just remembering who we were remembering who we could still be. And for the first time in a long time, I let the ache in. Because healing isn't always a grand moment of forgiveness. Sometimes, it's a text, a laugh, a shared memory that makes you look at someone and think, maybe we still belong to each other after all. They used to build houses with rooms that locked only from the outside. Control masked as care. It's for your safety, they'd say. But the truth was simpler, power. That's what my childhood felt like. Room after room, beautifully constructed, but with locks I never had the key to. Every conversation with my father was a hallway, long, cold, leading nowhere. Every holiday, a staged performance with applause for everyone else. But that winter, something shifted. Not just in Vanessa or Caleb or even in my father's silence. It was something in me. I stopped waiting for the keys. I started designing my own doors. My assistant, Nadia, poked her head into my office one morning. "There's someone here to see you. Says he doesn't have an appointment, but hopes you'll make time." I raised an eyebrow. Name? James Parker. My breath caught. My youngest brother. The one who rarely looked up from his phone at family gatherings. The one I thought hadn't noticed me since we were kids. "Send him in," I said, trying to keep my voice even. He walked in awkwardly, holding a paper bag from a bakery downtown. "I brought scones?" I smiled despite myself. Bribery. Bold. He sat, fidgeted. I read the article in the Tribune, then the one in Architectural Digest. "I didn't know half of that about what you've done." I figured. He looked at his hands. "I was a kid when you left. But I remember how quiet the house got. No one said it, but we all felt it." I stayed quiet, letting him speak. "You always made space feel like home. Even our rooms. The way you rearranged the furniture or added those little signs on our doors." Mine said, "Enter with kindness or not at all." I still think about that. I hadn't known he remembered. "I came because I wanted to say, 'I'm sorry,'" he said, "for not standing up for you. For not asking where you went when everyone acted like you'd just disappeared." I studied him. The boy who once clung to my leg at the park now sat before me, grown and apologizing. It was surreal. "It's not your apology to make," I said softly. "But thank you. It matters." We ate scones at my desk. He told me about his job, graphic design, surprisingly, and how he'd quietly followed my firm's work for over a year. "You make people feel something with your buildings. That's rare." "I try to build what I never had," I said. He nodded slowly. "Well, you built me. More than you know." When he left, I stared out the window for a long while, watching the city breathe beneath a sky of soft gray clouds. I had walked away from a family that didn't see me. But now, piece by piece, they were finding their way back. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But earnestly. Sometimes the hardest rooms to enter are the ones we built walls around ourselves. But even those can be redesigned. IT happened on a Sunday, gray, damp, the kind of day that clings to your skin and your spirit. I was sorting through boxes in my guest room, preparing for a quiet renovation. My hand landed on an old photo album I didn't recognize. It was leather-bound, cracked along the edges. No title. No labels. Curious, I opened it. Inside were photographs I hadn't seen in years, maybe decades. Childhood birthdays. School plays. Random summer afternoons. But what stopped me were the pages that followed. Blueprints. My early sketches. Photocopies of the very designs I used to share with my father, those first hopeful, messy drafts scrawled in pencil and ink. He had kept them. Each one was labeled in his handwriting. Olivia's first hotel concept. Park redesign, age 17. Legacy, unbuilt, but beautiful. I sank to the floor, album in my lap. He had saved them. He hadn't praised them, hadn't encouraged me, but he hadn't discarded them either. Somewhere in the silence, he had watched. Quietly, perhaps regretfully, but watched all the same. I flipped to the last page. A note, written in that same blocky handwriting. To the daughter I never understood, but always knew was building something extraordinary. I didn't know how to say it then. I hope you can hear it now. Dad. Tears came without warning. Not a flood, but a steady trickle, the kind that loosens something inside you that's been coiled too long. I didn't call him, not right away. I needed time to hold that moment without it becoming something else. But I wrote him back. I hear you. I built for myself because I thought no one else would. But I'm glad to know I wasn't completely invisible. Maybe we still have time to learn each other's language. Olivia. I mailed the letter. No expectation. No dramatic ending. Just a thread, extended across the distance. A blueprint of something we might still construct together. Redemption, after all, isn't a single act. It's a quiet series of choices. It was my mother who called next. Not with the usual clipped tone or social pleasantries, but with a tremble in her voice I hadn't heard since childhood. Your father read your letter, she said. He keeps it in his jacket pocket. I didn't know what to say. We're having everyone over next Sunday, she added, careful, slow. Just dinner. No speeches, no expectations. Just us. We'd like you there. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. But in the Parker family, it was close to a revolution. I said I'd think about it. All week I wrestled with the decision. I imagined the table, the place where so many of my dreams had been drowned in champagne toasts for someone else. The seat where I sat smiling while my father bragged about Marcus's surgeries, Vanessa's cases, James's golf scholarships. What would it mean to return? But I wasn't the same girl who once waited for a toast. I didn't need applause. I had built my own table. Maybe now I could walk into theirs on my own terms. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the Boston skyline, casting a honeyed hue over the street. The house looked unchanged, immaculate flower beds, polished front porch, the brass P still gleaming on the door. Vanessa opened it. She didn't speak, just pulled me into a hug. Inside, the table was already set, simple white china, my mother's favorite candlesticks. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air. And there he was. My father stood at the head of the table, a bit more stooped, a bit grayer. When he saw me, he nodded once. A tight, meaningful nod. Olivia, he said. Dad. We sat. The conversation was cautious at first. Caleb talked about his latest project. James shared a funny client story. Vanessa asked about a restaurant she wanted to renovate. Then silence fell. Everyone looked at my father. He cleared his throat. I saw the article, he said. Then the others. And your letter. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper. He didn't read it. Just held it. I didn't understand what you were doing, he said. And I'm sorry for making you think I didn't care. I did. I do. I just didn't know how to show it. The room was still. I don't need anything from you, I said softly. But thank you for saying that. I'd like to visit one of your hotels, he said. If that's all right. A breath caught in my throat. I'd like that. We passed the dishes around: roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. My childhood on a plate. But this time I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't silent. After dinner, as we lingered with tea and dessert, my mother touched my hand. You look so much like your grandmother when you smile, she said. I hadn't smiled like that at this table in years. But I did then. Because I knew the difference now between being invited and being welcomed. One is obligation. The other is choice. A week after the family dinner, I drove past the house where I grew up. I didn't plan to stop. I hadn't seen it in years, not really. I'd driven by occasionally, eyes flicking toward the window of my old room, but never with the engine off, never with the door open. That day was different. I parked. Walked the cracked sidewalk lined with the same hydrangeas my mother planted decades ago. Their petals were now pale, aging out of bloom. But they were still here. Still growing. The house seemed smaller. Time does that, I suppose. Shrinks giants into relics, or maybe shows us how large we've become. The porch creaked as I stepped onto it. I closed my eyes and listened. The wind through the screen door sounded the same. The wooden floor still had that soft give in the middle plank. Without knowing why, I knocked. The door opened moments later. My mother. Apron still tied around her waist. Hair grayer, but pulled back the same way she always did when she cooked. She blinked. Olivia? I nodded. Hi, Mom. You're early, she said, stepping aside. The scones aren't ready yet. I laughed, stepping in. It smelled like cinnamon and yeast, like childhood. Like the kitchen where I first learned the language of care wasn't always spoken. Sometimes it was baked. Sometimes it was just quietly placed on a plate. I wasn't sure you'd come back here, she said, setting a mug of tea in front of me. I wasn't either, I admitted. She sat across from me. Her hands fidgeted with a napkin. I've been thinking about the old days, she said. How we got things wrong. How I let your father's vision drown out your voice. I didn't interrupt. I used to think keeping peace meant staying quiet, she said. But maybe peace means protecting the right to be heard. I reached across the table, covered her hand with mine. We were all just doing what we knew, I said. But I know more now. And I'm choosing differently. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't cry. But she squeezed my hand. She pulled something from the drawer beside the table, a small, battered recipe box. This was your grandmother's, she said. She wanted you to have it. Inside were index cards, faded, stained, scrawled in slanted script. My grandmother's handwriting. Her cinnamon roll recipe. Her famous lemon cake. Notes in the margins. Don't forget to smile when you serve this. Love is an ingredient. I held the box like it was fragile treasure. Thank you, I whispered. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap, watching the light shift through the trees. My mother brought out warm scones, sat beside me. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Sometimes, coming home isn't about reclaiming space. Sometimes, it's about reclaiming truth. And letting love rise again in the silence. The attic had always been off limits growing up. Too dusty, my father said. Too dangerous, my mother added. But I knew the truth, it was their vault. The place they stored what they didn't want to face. So when I visited the house again the following weekend, this time at my mother's invitation, I asked if I could go up there. She paused. No one's been up there in years. Maybe that's why I should, I replied. She handed me the key without another word. The attic door creaked open with a groan, like it resented being disturbed. Dust motes danced in the thin shaft of light that came from a single window. The smell of cedar and thyme wrapped around me. Boxes lined the walls, Christmas decorations, old yearbooks, forgotten toys. But one trunk in the far corner caught my eye. It was dark green, brass corners, a tag tied to its handle. Oh, Parker, private. My breath caught. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. Inside, sketchbooks. Dozens of them. Some I thought I'd lost. Others I hadn't seen since high school. Tucked beside them was the miniature hotel model I made for a sophomore design class, one my father once dismissed as playtime with glue. He hadn't thrown it away. He'd saved it. Up here. In the dark. Hidden. I sank to my knees, flipping through the sketchbooks. My handwriting scrawled across margins. Notes to myself. Quotes. Ideas. Design is a form of memory. Build what you long for. Make space for the overlooked. I didn't cry. Not this time. I felt something quieter, a recognition of how much I'd given, how deeply I'd been dismissed, and yet how fiercely I'd continued to create. At the bottom of the trunk was a letter. Unopened. Sealed in an envelope with my name on it. My father's handwriting. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor and opened it, heart trembling. Olivia. I didn't know how to love what I couldn't understand. You were a storm and a symphony. I was building walls while you were designing windows. I see that now. I don't expect your forgiveness. But if there's a way back, I'll take it brick by brick. Dad. I folded the letter slowly, pressed it to my chest. Maybe some people love in silence. Maybe others hide their pride in the attic. And maybe, just maybe, healing doesn't mean redoing the past. It means opening the rooms you once locked. And letting the light in. Legacy Design Group was approaching its 5th anniversary. It felt unreal. 5 years since I filed those first incorporation papers. 5 years since I sat alone in a windowless co-working space, drafting my first proposal by hand. Now, we occupied 2 full floors of a downtown building. We had projects in 3 states. And we were planning an unveiling of our latest and most ambitious work yet, The Haven, a community space designed for women and children recovering from domestic trauma. It wasn't just architecture. It was a sanctuary, a rebellion against cold institutions and clinical walls. I poured my soul into it. The opening event was simple by choice. Soft lighting, acoustic music. No press releases, no speeches, just the families, the staff, and a few select guests. To my surprise, my entire family showed up. Not just Vanessa and Caleb, but James. Even my mother. And my father. They came quietly, without fanfare. My father stood in the back, hands clasped. He didn't speak to anyone at first. But he looked. He looked at every room. Every detail. The curved archways meant to soothe the mind. The sunken reading alcove lined with pillows. The stained glass pieces handmade by survivors. The wall with names carved into reclaimed wood, donors, builders, but mostly mothers and daughters who had never been celebrated before. When I finally walked over to where he stood, he didn't meet my eyes right away. Then he said, softly, "You didn't build this with stone. You built it with understanding." I felt the floor steady beneath me in a new way. "I built it for them," I replied. "And maybe a little bit for me." We walked the space together. In silence. In something like reverence. Later, as guests began to leave, Vanessa pulled me aside. "Mom wants to host Thanksgiving this year," she said. "And she wants you to bring your team." I blinked. "Why?" She said, "They're your real family too. And she wants to see what family looks like when it chooses each other." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the courtyard under string lights, barefoot, the cool stone beneath my feet. David joined me with 2 mugs of tea. "You did it," he said. "No," I whispered. "We did." He raised his mug in a quiet toast. "To the girl they tried to forget," he said. "And the woman the world will never ignore again." We clinked our cups. And somewhere deep inside me, a door I didn't even know was locked finally opened. Thanksgiving came faster than expected. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading it. My mother, ever the perfectionist, had transformed her home into something out of a magazine spread, candlelight flickering in gold sconces, cloth napkins folded like swans, the scent of rosemary and citrus hanging in the air. But this time, it felt less like performance and more like presence. Like she wanted us there not just to be seen, but to be felt. She greeted me at the door with a hug that lingered. "You brought them," she whispered. I nodded. Behind me stood my team. Not all of them, of course, just the inner circle. David, Jules, Naomi, and Micah. The ones who built legacy with me. Who stayed when the vision was nothing more than rough sketches and restless ambition. "Welcome," my mother said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. The dining room table had been extended to its fullest length. 2 cloth runners, mismatched chairs, extra plates pulled from storage. For once, it wasn't about symmetry. It was about space. "Sit wherever you like," she offered. So I did. I didn't sit in the old seat at the far end, tucked between the wall and the buffet, where I was always wedged as the youngest, the quiet one, the invisible thread. I took the seat beside my father. He looked at me, surprised, then nodded. "Glad you're here." And just like that, The old script was rewritten. Dinner flowed. Conversation didn't stumble over competition or credentials. It danced, dipped, found rhythm. My brothers teased each other. My mother complimented Naomi's earrings. My father asked David about our most recent project. But the moment I'll never forget came after dessert. My father stood, his glass in hand. "I never used to make toasts," he said. "Left that to the ones with more words." Everyone chuckled. But I want to say something now. To Olivia. All eyes turned to me. I spent too long believing success had one shape, one sound, one name, and I judged anything outside that shape too quickly, too harshly. He paused. "You've shown me that leadership doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it builds quietly, consistently, until it changes the skyline." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. He lifted his glass. To the builder. The storm. The daughter we didn't know how to see until she taught us how. Tears welled in my eyes. Everyone raised their glasses. To Olivia, they echoed. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was reclaiming a seat at their table. I felt like I had made one of my own, and they had chosen to gather there. It was a week after Thanksgiving when the courier arrived. I had just wrapped a design meeting with a nonprofit focused on transitional housing for young women aging out of foster care, another project close to my heart, when the receptionist called up. "There's a delivery here for you." Personal. Hand-signed. Curious, I came down to the lobby. The courier, dressed in black and gray, handed me a long rectangular package with a nod. No words. Just an envelope attached with wax seal and crisp ivory paper. Inside the package, wrapped in layers of protective foam, was a frame. And within the frame, the deed to my very first hotel, the Paragon. The same property my father once said was a vanity project. The one I'd poured my entire savings into. The one that made me skip meals, delay vacations, and live off caffeine and willpower. The title, now officially notarized, bore one signature, Richard A. Parker, my father. He had signed over full ownership. No partners. No silent shares. No strings. I stood there numb. In awe. The envelope contained a letter. Short. Crisp. But every word weighed something. "Olivia, you built the Paragon from foundation to finish. I never should have touched it, not even in name. Consider this my apology and your rightful inheritance returned. I was wrong. Your legacy belongs to you." Dad. For a long time, I said nothing. I just held it. My thumb brushing over the embossed seal. My chest tight with something between sorrow and healing. I had worked so long, so hard, just to be taken seriously. To be heard. To be believed. Now, I was being acknowledged in the most tangible way my father knew how. Not with flowers, not with words, but with a deed. With the foundation itself. That evening, I took the frame home. Hung it above my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that reclamation doesn't always come in the way we expect. Sometimes, it's not a confrontation. Sometimes, it's a quiet door opened. And the echo of someone finally saying, "I see you. I trust you. I know what you've built." Legacy's 5th anniversary gala was set for early spring. My team insisted we mark it with more than an email newsletter or a quiet staff lunch. "People need to see this," Olivia, Jules had said. "They need to feel what you've built." So we booked the ballroom at the Paragon, our flagship, the heartbeat of everything. A poetic full circle. We designed the evening to reflect us. Warm light, raw materials, exposed beams, soft music that rose like breath in the chest. No forced applause. Just story. On the day of the event, I walked the halls alone before guests arrived. The main corridor leading to the ballroom had been transformed into a gallery of our work, photographs, sketches, concept notes. Each framed like a tribute to the quiet revolution we'd led. At the end of the hall stood a new piece. It wasn't a rendering. It wasn't one of my designs. It was a portrait. Me mid-laugh, wind in my hair, standing barefoot on the rooftop of one of our completed projects. I hadn't known the photo existed, but there it was, printed in monochrome, softly lit and captioned beneath. Founder, dreamer, builder of belonging. I stopped and stared. It was like being seen by the space itself. David came to stand beside me. "That's how we all see you," he said quietly. Not the girl behind the curtain. Not the overlooked sister. Just Olivia. In full. I touched the frame. I thought of every year I spent waiting for someone to notice. Every time I held back my voice for fear of overshadowing someone else. Every sacrifice written in the margins of other people's successes. No more. As guests poured in, I greeted each one like a host who finally believed in her own welcome. My family came too. Vanessa wore a gown the color of dusk, and she hugged me tightly. Caleb and James brought their partners. My mother arrived with a bouquet of lilies, my favorites. My father came last. He walked the hallway slowly, hands behind his back, stopping in front of each photo. When he reached the portrait, he lingered. "I didn't know they were going to display this," I said. He nodded. "They should have." He didn't try to say more. And I didn't ask him to. Some things are meant to be witnessed, not explained. And on that night, as lights dimmed and music began, I realized something. This was no longer the story of the girl who wasn't invited. This was the story of the woman who built the house, the table, the future, and opened the door herself. The morning after the gala, I stood in my bathroom, staring into the mirror. The woman who looked back at me wasn't new. She had always been there. But now she wasn't waiting to be chosen. She wasn't hoping to be softened, polished, made more palatable. She had lines around her eyes earned, a steadiness in her jaw built, a glow that came not from praise, but from peace. I remembered all the times I had studied this mirror before, trying to make myself smaller, trying to find the version of me that would finally earn their approval. Now, I realized that was never my job. It was theirs to see me. It was mine to become. Later that day, I walked into the office to find my team gathered in the break room, laughter echoing off the glass walls. On the table sat a cake, chocolate, my favorite, with the words "Still Rising" piped in soft gold icing. Jules handed me a small gift bag. "Open it." Inside was a delicate gold pendant, engraved with a blueprint motif on one side, and on the other, the initials OP. "We made it custom," Micah said. "It's not about your initials. It's about the legacy. Olivia Parker is more than a name now." I swallowed a lump in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. That afternoon, I met with a potential investor for our next project, a wellness retreat for survivors of burnout and workplace trauma. He was polished, polite, but somewhere in his questions, I sensed the old test. Would I yield? Would I dilute? I didn't. I spoke plainly, boldly, not just about financials, but about purpose. About building spaces that help people remember themselves. When I finished, he said, "I've sat through 100 of these pitches, but yours is the first one that didn't feel like a pitch. It felt like a promise." I smiled. "It is." He signed on the spot. That night, I walked home beneath the city lights, the pendant warm against my skin. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Dinner soon?" "Just us. No performances. Just sisters." I replied simply, "Always." Because now I knew I didn't have to perform to be loved. I didn't have to explain to be understood. I just had to show up as myself, fully. The rooftop of the Paragon had always been my favorite place. Not because of the skyline view or the luxury it whispered, but because it reminded me of the fire escapes I used to climb as a teenager, seeking quiet, seeking sky. After the gala, I found myself up there more often, alone, reflecting. One afternoon, as winter softened into early spring, I stood there with a small trowel and a tray of seedlings in my hands. The rooftop garden, one of our first eco-design elements, had been left untended for months. Somewhere between client meetings, family reconnections, and press interviews, I had forgotten it. Weeds had claimed the corners. The soil was dry. but some of the lavenders still bloomed. Stubborn, fragrant, defiant. I knelt and began to work. Slowly, tenderly. Not out of guilt, but out of something deeper, a knowing that care, even delayed, still mattered. David joined me halfway through, sleeves rolled up, hands ready. "You don't have to do this," I said. "I know," he replied. "But I want to." We worked in silence. Cleared old roots. Planted new seeds. Built trellises from reclaimed wood. "Funny," I murmured. "How we sometimes forget to tend to the things we love most." He looked at me, something soft in his eyes. "What matters has a way of waiting for us." That evening, I wrote in my journal, a ritual I'd picked up again after years of neglect. "Dear Olivia, you remembered how to bloom. Not because someone told you to. Not because they finally noticed. But because you chose to stay rooted even when the light was gone. That's the garden they'll never understand. But you do. And that's enough." I tucked the journal away and stepped outside once more. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze. Alive. Enduring. Like me.it came on a Tuesday. I was reviewing materials for our upcoming wellness retreat, floor plans that curved instead of cut, colors chosen for calm rather than flash, when my phone buzzed. Private number. I rarely answered those anymore. But something nudged me. "Hello." A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "Olivia. It's Aunt Marilyn." The woman who once rolled her eyes at my little design experiments. Who had been my mother's closest sister and my fiercest critic. I leaned back in my chair. "Well, this is unexpected." "I read about the gala," she said. "Saw the photos. I didn't know you had become." She didn't finish the sentence. I waited. "You've built something real," she finally said. "And I think I owe you an apology." I didn't answer right away. My heart was steady now, no longer fluttering at the scent of overdue validation. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "But thank you." "I have a favor to ask," she added, hesitant. "It's my daughter, Amelia. She's applying to design school. She needs guidance. And well, I think you might be the right person to talk to." Amelia, my cousin. Once a toddler in lace socks, now apparently tracing her own creative path. I smiled. Not because I needed to feel superior, but because I had the chance to be the person I once needed. "Tell her to email me," I said. "I'd be happy to meet her." "Thank you, Olivia." Truly. When the call ended, I sat there for a while, watching the afternoon light stretch across my desk. The arc of a story, if it's honest, bends not just toward justice, but toward gentleness. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to kneel. I just needed to live. And now I had the chance to lift someone else as I rose. Later, I met with Amelia. She was bright, raw, unshaped, brimming with questions no one had taken seriously until now. She asked about failure, about doubt, about how to stay true to herself when everyone around her demanded something easier to digest. I told her the truth. "Don't shrink for their comfort," I said. "Design like you mean to be remembered." She grinned. "I will." And in her eyes, I saw the future not of my name, but of the spaces we make when we believe we belong.